The God's Wood within the Red Keep was no true God's Wood. Only a square of earth where southern oaks crowded a shallow pool and some gardener's notion of tranquility strained against the city's heat. Eddard Stark stood at its edge with his cane braced in the loam and the ache in his splinted leg beating a slow, honest drum through his bones. The torches had been doused. Moonlight seeped across the water like milk spilled thin. A faint smell of salt clung to the air from the unseen Blackwater. He would have preferred snow. He would have preferred the rasp of leaves on a face carved by unknown hands, and the way wind could seem to speak when it passed the lips of a heart tree. Here the leaves only whispered of dust and harbor rot and stone. He had already written the letters, 3 copies of the same command in his own hand, with the same spare words that had borne him through campaign tents and winter stores and a lifetime of decisions. Rob, call our banners and march with all haste. Bring every man who can sit a saddle and every man who can wield spear or bow. Take the King's Road. Present yourself at King's Landing. Keep your counsel tight as bark. Trust Luwin as you would trust me. I shall hold the city. He had sealed them with the direwolf and sent them 3 ways at once. One by the Red Keep's rookery, because form had its uses even when the Grand Maester simpered and blinked like an old turtle. Another hidden inside a satchel of butchered eels to a white harbor fisherman waiting at the far wharf. The third entrusted to Tomard and a grim-faced riverman paid to change horses at every post from the Blackwater to the Green Fork. A raven was swifter than any rider, but ravens could be intercepted and men could be bought. He had learned that in King's Landing as surely as he had learned the taste of the river dust that sifted into every meal. The ache in his leg spiked when he turned. He bore it. Pain made a man straightforward. It pared away the softness that courts luxuriated in, the way a whetstone pared a nicked edge back to true. Straight ahead lay the Tower of the Hand with its narrow stairs and his bed where sleep had not come. Straight ahead lay mourning and Robert and decisions that would bleed. He found Ser Barristan Selmy waiting for him at the base of the tower, tall even in shadow, with his white cloak cast about his shoulders though it dragged in the grime. The Lord Commander looked as if he had slept in the armor he now wore. That made 2 of them. My Lord Hand, Selmy said quietly. The king's fever worsens. The royal physician insists the wound is turning. Pycelle insisted the wound was not grave, Ned said. He insisted yesterday that the boar that gored him had tusks no longer than his thumb. Our Grand Maester is a man of many insistences. The old knight's mouth flattened. The king asked for you. Ned nodded, then looked past Selmy to the starlit courtyard. How many men do you have in the Red Keep who will obey you first and collar second? There are men who will obey oath and honor, if that is what you ask. Selmy's eyes did not waver. But honor has been much confused in this city of late. I will put something simple in their hands to cleave to. Ned shifted his weight and started for the stairs. I have ordered the city watches pay doubled. Selmy's brows drew together. Out of what treasury? Whatever chest Littlefinger pretends is full this week, Ned said. And if he says there is none, the promise stands and the coin will be found when the crown ceases throwing feasts at war's sake. Janos Slint will howl, then he will count, then he will obey. Or turn, Selmy said as they climbed. Then we shall face him with men whose vows run deeper than coin. Ned paused on the landing. The guards at the gate to the king's apartments stood like carved figures. If he turns, Ser Barristan, keep your knights close. If it comes to steel, the first cut will not be yours. I have never been quick to the first cut, Selmy said. I am quick enough to the last. Inside Robert's chamber the candle smoke lay heavy, and the sound of the king's breathing rasped like a man dragging a blade along a dirty stone. He was red-faced and glazed with sweat, and it tore something old and private in Ned to see the friend of his youth sunk so low. Renly stood at the foot of the bed with his handsome face tight as if laughter had been stitched shut at the corners. Varys hovered in the corner like a shadow that had learned to smile. Pycelle loomed, drooping, his chain of links glimmering like a snake's skin in uncertain light. Stark, Robert said hoarsely when Ned took his hand. Gods, your face is long as winter. Don't look at me as if I'm a corpse in a barrow. You're not, Ned said, and it did not feel like a lie. because Robert's hand squeezed his hard and living. But you need a will that says what you mean plainly. Robert blinked up at the canopy. He smelled of wine and sickness and bore. Plain. Plain's best, Ned. I never was made for words spared like coins. Pycelle coughed in the way the man had of suggesting a thought belonged to him. If your grace wishes to. Robert's head turned. Be still, maester. The dark of his eyes found Ned again. Write it. Protector. You. Until the boy comes of age. Keep them safe. I've been a fool. Keep them safe from fools with crowns and fools with swords. Ned did not trust the parchment or the ink. Not in this place, not under this many eyes. He wrote it anyway, spare words, the way he would have written orders to stand a watch at the fist of the first men. A hand holding until age and right took the place. When it was done, Robert glazed it with a seal clumsy as a bloodstain and laughed weakly at the mess. It will do, he said. It will do or it won't. The realm can find someone else who loves it less to tear it again. Renly's mouth had thinned further. The queen has not left her chambers, he said. She took the royal children to Maegor's holdfast at dusk. Her brothers have their men in the Red Keep. Then remove half of them, Ned said. Ser Barristan, place the Kingsguard within arm's reach of the king and the hand and nowhere else. Janos Slynt is to post the watch in the yards, at the gates, and along the hall. If a Lannister retainer lifts a blade in the Red Keep, I want him faced by 10 of the watch and then by the Kingsguard. Selmy inclined his head. It will be done. Varys's fingers brushed each other like the kiss of paper. You move swiftly, Lord Stark. The Queen has many friends, and there are many doors in the Red Keep. There are also keys, Ned said, and his look found Renly now in a way that was not a question. You came to me 2 days ago and asked me to arrest a woman's children in the small hours. Renly flushed. I came to prevent madness. You refused and spoke of honor. We will not put steel to a child's throat in the dark, Ned said, hearing his own voice and the iron in it. But neither will I allow the Queen to turn children into knives and hold this city by fear. If she has walled herself in Maegor's holdfast, then we will wall the holdfast in turn, gently and publicly. The crown's heirs will be kept in soft rooms with guards outside and food within. The city will be kept from blood. When the king dies, the matter of succession will be set by law and proof, not by surprise. Renly swallowed whatever answer his pride wanted. He looked at Robert as if he might find permission to run or to fight. There had always been something in the younger Baratheon that made Ned think of a bright pennon in a quick wind, beautiful, quick to move, ready to tear. He would not tear here, not with Robert gripping Ned's hand as if it anchored him to the earth. Go, Robert muttered at last, his voice already fading again. Do as you will, Ned. Take the city in my name. Keep them safe until it's all sorted. It would not be sorted. Ned knew that as he knew the beat of his heart, as he knew the North. But he bowed, kissed Robert's brow, and left his friend to cough and sleep and die among the tapestries, smelling faintly of dog, horse, and the field. He met Janos Slynt in the yard with a chest. Littlefinger watched them with eyes that gleamed as if the thought of coin could warm him. Peter Baelish had a gift for placing himself where he was most plausible. Here, at the foot of accounting, he looked like a man home in his church. Double pay for the men, Ned said flatly to Slynt. In the king's name. In the king's name, is it? Littlefinger murmured. Always a dependable formula. And out of what coffer, my lord? The king's coffer is wanting. In the king's name, Ned repeated, and nodded at Tomard, who had the key. The chest opened to reveal bright discs taken not from the crown's vaults but seized from a Lannister paymaster stopped en route to a barracks near Flea Bottom at dawn by the alacrity of Stark men and a warrant signed in Robert's hand. When the crown's arrears are made good, Slynt, you and your captains will receive a second doubling for your prompt obedience. You will post your men at the gates to Maegor's holdfast. No one enters without my seal or Ser Barristan's voice. No one leaves without the same. You will seal the city gates and set double watches. You will compel no Lannister man to surrender his steel. You will only match him with your own, 10 to 1, and compel him to go elsewhere. Slint's thick fingers hovered over the coin as if he feared a trap that might bite. He looked at Littlefinger. Littlefinger's smile had all the warmth of the candlelight it reflected. "Do as he says, Janos. The hand speaks with the king's voice today." Slint grunted and reached for the coin. Peter Baelish turned away at once to whisper to a clerk, the movement quick and delicate, like a fish slipping from a net. Ned watched him go and felt cold even in the heat. He had no proof that Littlefinger meant him ill. He had, instead, the accumulation of glances and small misdirections and the sense of threads tugged in the walls. A man did not need proof to know where a draft entered a house. Frost creeping along the edge of a shutter told its own truth. Sansa sat at her window in the Tower of the Hand with her hands folded so precisely the knuckles looked like the petals of a pale-seeded flower pressed too hard between pages. She had not cried since the king was brought in from the hunt. She had told herself that queens did not cry and she would be a queen. It had sounded true in her mind until the words had to be laid against the day, and then nothing sounded true except the distant thrum of a city that never slept and the restless stomping of horses in the yard. Jane Poole dozed with her cheek against Sansa's thigh, breathing softly. Outside the shutters, the city made its thousand noises. Hawkers, wheels on cobbles, an argument rising like sparks and dying at once when a patrol approached. Sansa thought of Joffrey and of his smile, the way it could be so bright and then sharp, bright the way a knife was bright, and she told herself that this was not her fault, that no one could have kept the boar from goring a king. Yet she had prayed for a story. She had wanted the tourney and the songs, and now the queen had locked herself away, and the knights she loved to watch no longer laughed when they passed in the yard. She did not know when Arya slipped into the chamber. Arya was a quiet thing when she wanted to be, which seemed unfair, since good girls ought to be the quiet ones, and Arya was not good in any way Sansa had been taught to look for. She moved like a shadow and smelled faintly of sweat and old leather and the oil Syrio used on his wooden sword. "Father has the watch at the gates," Arya said without preamble. "Syrio says you should keep your mouth shut and your eyes open. He says the fat man with the chain is a liar and the little man with the mustache is a liar twice." "You shouldn't call the Grand Maester fat," Sansa said automatically, and wished she had not when Arya's quick grin flickered and vanished. "I didn't," Arya said. "Syrio did. He says this is not a place for girls. He says this is a place for swords. Everything is a place for men and swords, if you listen to you and father," Sansa retorted, then flushed, because it felt ugly to say. "I didn't mean. I know what you meant." Arya's face shifted. She looked older sometimes when she forgot to scowl. "Joffrey's men tried to make Syrio let them take me to the holdfast. He said lessons were not done. They didn't stay. Syrio didn't even raise his stick." Sansa felt her stomach tighten. "The queen asked that you be brought. The queen is protecting her children." "The queen is protecting herself," Arya said. "Father told me, and he told Syrio to keep teaching me. So if the queen wants me, she will have to learn the water dance, and she never will because she doesn't like to sweat." She cocked her head. "Do you still want to marry Joffrey?" "I am betrothed to Joffrey." Sansa's voice sounded brittle and airy to her. "Betrothals are promises. They don't break them in songs." "They do here," Arya said, "which was not how you spoke to your sister when she was trying very much to be brave. Ned did not bring his daughters to Maegor's holdfast with the queen's children. He brought Ser Barristan and 200 men and the sealed letter Robert had signed and the seal that still bore a trace of the king's blood. Cersei wore mourning already, though the king still breathed. Black became her. She looked at him as if she could set him afire with her eyes alone. Joffrey bristled beside her like a cat with a dog's heart, all preen and show and the glint of small cruelties. Tommen clung to his sister's hand and looked as if he might cry but was too well trained to do it where anyone important could see. Myrcella watched with wide, pale eyes that reminded Ned of a winter sky before snow. "You come with a letter," Cersei said when Ned told her of the king's order. She smiled. "Show it to me." He did, and she ran one fingertip along the edges and then tore the parchment in half and then in half again. The small, decisive sound of paper parting was the loudest thing in the great chamber after the clank of a helm as one of Janos Slint's men shifted his weight. "The king dies," the queen said with terrible calm. "His son succeeds him. There is no need for temporary men. The law of the realm is not born with your son," Ned said. "It is older than he is and weighs more also." "You were never made to bear weight that was not northern," Cersei said. "This is a southern city, Lord Stark. Do you know what they do here to men who bring winter with them? They starve them until they love spring." Ned let the words pass. He gave the order, and the watch moved forward, not with a rush but with the patience of men who had been told the counting house would open for them again before noon. They placed themselves between the queen and the doors, between the queen and the stair that wound to the private galleries. Barristan's white cloak brushed Cersei's sleeve. He did not flinch, and neither did she. "You are confined within Maegor's holdfast, your grace," Ned said. "Your children are not to leave. Your household may attend you. Your brothers may not." "Ah," Cersei said, the faintest curve touching her mouth. "You try to be gentle. You try to make a cage of silk." She looked past Ned to Slint. "You will suffer for this. You first." Slint stared back at her with a look that had already been bought and told her nothing. Joffrey took a step forward. "I command you." "You command nothing," Barristan said without raising his voice. "You will not command until you are a king." Even the boy had the sense to bring his mouth down over his teeth at that, though his eyes burned. Cersei's narrowed. "You dare to speak so to?" "I dare to keep the peace," Barristan said, and then to Ned quietly, "The watch is posted. We will hold the holdfast in as you ordered. The city gates are shut." Varys drifted to Ned's elbow as they turned away. "A velvet glove makes it easier to close a fist," the eunuch breathed, "and harder to pry it open again." "Then we will not pry," Ned said. "We will unlock." When Robert died at dusk the next day, the bells rang and men wept in wine, and women in the markets told each other that tears were a reasonable price for all that meat and wine and noise, for men who could fill a hall and leave it emptied. Ned washed his hands after he touched his friend's cold brow, though they were already clean. He stood in a quiet corner until he could trust his face, and then he went to the throne room with the sealed will and Ser Barristan and the watch ranked behind them in ranks straight as plow furrows. Cersei had not been fetched to kneel. She had made it known that her grief was too great for kneeling. She remained in Maegor's holdfast. Joffrey had not been brought to sit. Ned spoke the words Robert had written and named himself protector until the rightful heir came to take what law said was his. And if half the court heard Stannis in that word rightful and half heard Joffrey and half heard only their own fear, well, that was how courts heard anything. He sent ravens that afternoon not just to Dragonstone but to Storm's End and Old Town and Sunspear and the Eyrie and Riverrun, and he sent riders up the King's Road to carry the same decree where ravens could not be trusted. That night Renly Baratheon departed the city with 100 swift swords and the smell of roses trailing in his wake as he slipped through a postern gate behind the Godswood. He had come to Ned again and urged him to do the deed in the dark he had urged before. Ned had refused again, and if the refusal came harder now, it came still. "Stannis will never win men," Renly had said. "I can." "Men are not the measure," Ned had answered. "Right is the measure." It was a winter answer in a summer city, and it set Renly moving toward Highgarden, where summer lay thick on every branch. In the Eyrie, the sky was a polished coin and the wind cut clean. Catelyn Stark stood on the edge of a sky cell with her hands locked around the iron bars, while a small man with mismatched eyes leaned his back against the wall and smiled because that was what he did when he knew he should not. Tyrion Lannister had a way of making the air himself by refusing to breathe the air other men were willing to give him. Bronn lounged in the shadows with the dangerous indolence of men who knew what their bodies could do and who were ready to sell it dear. Lisa had made the Vale a locked coffer, and she sat her high seat with her son in her lap and her mouth full of words about treachery and lions and the way the world would end were a lion allowed to lift its paw. Catelyn had spent her voice and her patience there. She had sent a letter to Riverrun, another to Winterfell. She had pressed her palm to the cool stone and wished it were river water and that she could fling herself into it and let it carry her home. Tyrion asked for a trial by combat. Lisa laughed until it trilled into something bird-high. There were knights of the Vale for the asking. Bronn stepped forward and shrugged as if asked to carry a sack of grain where another man had suggested he might break his back. The fight that followed did not favor song. It favored speed and dust and the way a man's breath caught wrong when his feet lost grip and he scrabbled at the air before the moon door ate him. Tyrion walked free. He bowed to Catelyn with a courtesy that might have been real and might have been armor, and then he vanished into the mountains in Bronn's wake. Lisa had her door and her boy and her fear. Catelyn had her road and her vow and the knowledge that the world moved below the veil whether Lisa looked at it or not. At Winterfell, the ravens came one by another until the day was a drumbeat and every drumbeat a word. Robb took the scroll from Maester Luwin's hand and held it in his fingers without opening it, as if he could make the paper warmer by simple stubbornness. He had grown taller in Ned's absence, the way boys did when men were looking south. The weight had not yet settled in him as it had settled in his father, but it was settling. He slit the seal. The order was simple. It was what he had expected and what he had both balked at hoping for and wanted. He read it twice, then a third time, then gave it to Theon, who made a low sound in his throat and grinned as if the world had rolled a dice and come up wolf. "Call the banners," Robb said, and the words made something shiver through him and settle different. "Send for the Great John, for Lord Serwyn, for Lord Hornwood, for Lord Manderley, for the Karstarks, for Lady Mormont and the Glovers and Tallheart and all. Tell them to bring steel and men and round bellies to carry them. We march south to the king." "The king's dead," Theon said, a shadow flickering behind his amusement. "We march to the city that ate him." "We march to my father," Robb said, and that was iron, not shadow. Maester Luwin's chain rattled as he dipped his head. "Lord Stark." "I am not Lord Stark," Robb said, surprising himself with the suddenness of it. "But I will stand in his place until he returns." He looked to Bran's chair and to Rickon, whose fists were clenched around a roll carved from a bit of pine with teeth marks along one edge like part of a child's history. "Bran, you sit for me here. You sit the high seat and judge small disputes and hold the keys. Your people will love you for being fair, not for being kind. Rickon, you will not fill the kitchens with wolves." Rickon scowled and jammed the pine roll harder between his little teeth. Shaggy Dog's green eyes flashed from the corner, and gray wind rose just enough to let the light slide along the ridges of his back like water along shale. Robb put his hand in the rough fur between his own wolf's ears and felt steadier. The great hall filled, then the yard, then the lands beyond the whispers of the walls. Men came smelling of horses and smoke and old leather. Their voices filled the winter courtyard with the sound of oaths that had been said before by their fathers and their fathers' fathers until the words felt like the wood of a well-used haft. Comfort through callous and weight both. The great John Umber crashed in like a storm, huge and ruddy and loud, and the first thing he did was test the boy who called him. Robb watched him, matched him, and when the great John reached for his sword because his pride had been pricked, gray wind moved in the space between breaths, and then the great John's hand bled and his laugh peeled out like lightning hitting a tree. "A wolf with teeth," he boomed, flexing fingers gone suddenly fewer. "The North remembers after all." Roose Bolton came quiet and pale, eyes like water over ice, voiced the voice of a man who could flay a hide and speak of the grain of the leather in the same sentence. Wyman Manderley arrived with the practical smell of fish on his cloak and promises of bread for a long march. Meage Mormont rode in with her daughters behind and the look in her eye that said men were slow but steel was quick and either could be relied upon if you paid attention. Rickard Karstark's grief rode ahead of him like a banner. Robb felt it before he heard the name of the son who had died on a street in King's Landing wearing the direwolf on his chest. Robb listened to them all. He repeated his father's order. He placed Helman Tallheart in charge of the march's vanguard until the great John took it by weight and the others let him. He sent riders ahead to the neck to warn Jory's kin at Moat Cailin to man more garrisons and see more eyes set to the reeds. He took counsel and then stepped away from counsel and looked at the maps that had hung on the walls of the Solar since he was small. The King's Road ran like a spine down the map, a pale curve through forests and farm and river. It would carry them as a road carries any boot. Howland Reed would watch for the step that sank. When Robb's riders came to the green water they found them, the Cranagmen, narrow men with their river eyes and their fish-skin boots and the patience of things that had learned to wait. They showed Rob that there were two kinds of swift in the neck, the kind you could count and the kind you could not see. Rob thanked them and took their guides and moved. Moat Cailin was a broken fist laid across the road. The towers rose from the salt marsh with the stubbornness that old stone has when it refuses to remember it belongs to the dirt. Rob stood upon one tower and felt the wind off the sea in his hair. It smelled of brine and old promises. He knew his father had stood somewhere like this. He hoped his father had felt steadier looking south than Rob did. He did not have the comfort of believing it likely. They caught wildlings in the marshes. Osha stared at the boy in the Lord's cloak and at the wolf at his side, and Rob stared back at a face he expected to be hard with malice and found. Instead, hunger and a quiet that had nothing to do with fear. "Winter comes," she said when questioned, and men laughed, and she did not. "I saw dead men moving. The neck is damp," the great John declared later when the men had been set to work on the road and the dull tasks that made an army move smooth. "Damp makes minds soft." "You've never been north of the wall," Osha said. "You think your cold is cold because you cannot think of colder. You will." Rob might have laughed another day. He had other cold around his heart now. He thanked her for the warning, put her under guard at the back of the host, and told himself that the wall had men who knew its snow and would tell the world what to fear when it could afford to listen. At King's Landing the city swelled as grief swelled, a tide that never ebbed for long. Varys brought whispers of small riots in Flea Bottom quelled by watch halberds and a few coins thrown where they would do most good. The High Septon preached that the Seven held the realm in their hands and would dispense justice between mother and wolf. The crowd shouted for bread, which the Seven did not dispense. Mortally wagons creaked into the city, and into the baking ovens went flour stamped with a merman. Ned issued tithing orders to the bakers. Men grumbled and obeyed because watch spears encouraged obedience where the hand seal did not. He appointed new officers in the kitchens, as if making sure the bottom of a kettle would not burn could keep fire from slipping into the rafters. Peter Baelish came once to the Tower of the Hand in the late afternoon when the light was thick and false, and he spread his fingers as if showing they were empty. "You have the watch for now. You have the old night. You have a letter dead as the man who wrote it. You have a city you do not love." His smile took on just enough pain to be beautiful. "What you do not have, my lord, is time. Stannis will not bring you men. He will bring you proof." He tapped the table where the heavy book of lineages sat open to a page Ned had memorized with a taste like iron in his mouth. "Proof is good in Old Town. Here they like pageantry." "I have no use for pageantry," Ned said. "Then you had best move very quickly," Littlefinger said, "or learn how to die to music." Ned had him arrested the next morning. No man he trusted would do it without asking why. He told them that an investigation into the Treasury's accounts had turned up irregularities, which was true and also uninteresting. It was the only way to set hands upon Baelish without telling the man arresting him that vipers hissed out his tongue. Peter bowed when the watchmen surrounded him, made some mild joke, and went away as if this were a new board, a new game, and he had tired of the old one. Ned made sure he was placed in a cell with stone on 3 sides and iron on the 4th, and a guard at the door who could not be bought for less than a kingdom. He did not feel safer. He felt only as if one door had been closed, and now they would see which windows took light. 3 days after Robert died, a black-sailed ship slipped into the mouth of the Blackwater and tied up at a private quay. Davos Seaworth climbed from it with his hand half-gloved and his eyes narrowed against the city light. He carried a letter sealed with the fiery heart of a god most men in the city considered a southern curiosity at best. He found his way to the Tower of the Hand and placed the letter on Ned Stark's table and stood with his hat in his hands as if he stood in a sept and not in a tower that smelled faintly of northern oil and parchment. "Stannis Baratheon is the lawful heir," Davos said in the blunt way of men who do not love words and do not fear them either. "My lord asks your oath and offers his own. He asks for your hand, not your sword." "He will have both," Ned said. "He will also have this city, kept intact for him and not held for another with a boy's hair and a lie. He will not set his ships against our walls." Davos tilted his head, as if to see the wolf from a new angle. "My lord has little knack for friendships," he said. "He has a great knack for stubbornness." "Then we will not offend each other," Ned said. "Tell Lord Stannis that his claim is recognized, that we will show the city proof he cannot deny, that his coming will be met with open gates. Tell him that Renly rides for the Tyrells and will have their banners. Tell him that the Lannisters are in the field and that Tywin will not starve while he can find grain and take it." Davos nodded. "He knows it. He sends word to Storm's End to secure the garrison and to Old Town to be sure of lords who love the law more than they love wine. He will not come at a run. Tell him to come at a march," Ned said. "We will hold the pace." Robb Stark had never seen the twins, only heard of them. The way squares of stone mirroring each other across the Green Fork drew life from the narrow bridge like a throat drinking. When he saw them, he understood why men cursed the phrase luck and their arrogance both. The castles were not grand. They were canny. Old stone sat on stone with the simple confidence of a man who has never been moved against his will. Walder Frey made a show of keeping Robb waiting, which told Robb more about the man than any gossip. He did not keep Lady Catelyn waiting when she rode into the camp the night before their banners were to touch the bridge. Robb went to his mother like a thirsty man went to a well and drank what comfort there was in simple presence. She had a valiant face, his mother. She could hold sorrow back behind it the way a river holds a bend, and then it came around hard on you and you had to bear it. She took the lead at the parley with Lord Frey because she had played with the man's sons as a girl, and because his rude speeches would strike her less than they would strike a boy whose wolf still rode too close to the skin. "You want my bridge," Walder Frey said, his voice like old leather rubbed thin and hard both. "You want what I have kept. You will pay." "We will pay," Catelyn said before Robb could open his mouth. She named hostages, she named fosters, she named marriages. She named his name. Robb felt the moment his own gut clenched. He thought of Jane Poole crying on Sansa's lap and of a girl at Winterfell with a braid too tight. He thought of the fact that he had never seen the face of the woman he was to marry and of the fact that if he did not swear now the host would halt at the bridge until the Lannisters had finished carving all the meat they liked from the Riverlands and from him in turn. "I will wed when the war allows," Robb said when it was his turn to speak. His voice sounded steady to his own ears, which was all that mattered. "I will wed your daughter. Send her to Winterfell when the snows come. She will find a hearth there. Give me your bridge." Walder Frey's eyes gleamed at the bargain as a magpie's eyes gleamed at bright things. "Take it," he said, and made 1,000 small requests besides. Robb granted all of them that did not offend his father's honor and smiled when he had to, as his mother had taught him. The Green Fork took Roose Bolton and 10,000 men to face Lord Tywin's main host. That had been Robb's first major decision as a commander, and his stomach had knotted after giving the order, for Bolton was smooth and precise and held himself as if even his breath had been measured in a long room with no dust and no sound except a quill across parchment. But he had been right for the crossings and the fords and the way a quiet man was not always a slow man. The Great John and the Karstarks and Meege Mormont and the Blackfish who had joined them from Riverrun, as if a trout could slip out of any net, took half the horse, and Robb took them across the bridge at night with the wolves running silent beside them. They descended upon the Lannister camp at the Whispering Wood as dawn made men foolish and soft. Jaime Lannister was laughing when they struck him, a sound that rode ahead of him the way a horn call rode ahead of a hunt. He cut men like wheat until Grey Wind came through the press and took a piece of his calf with a speed that made even Lannister steel look dull. The Kingslayer went down tangled under men and horse and a wolf's sudden weight, and when he came up he was red and white at once, furious and grinning, and his sword was not in his hand. Robb met his eye and saw no fear there. He saw something he recognized and did not love. A man who felt alive when steel was singing and who could make a song of most anything if it suited him. "Your father will pay dearly for you," Robb said afterward when the man was bound and clean and seated on a stump with his hair tangled and his mouth a line that could be nobility or disdain depending on where you stood. "My father does not pay," Jaime said. "My father collects. Then he will collect his son's silence," Robb said, "until the realm is righted." They marched to Riverrun with the Kingslayer riding under courtesy guard, and the banners went up on the towers like prayer flags. Edmure Tully came out pale with the humiliation of loss and the relief of brother's daughter and men flooding in like water breaking a dam. The old Lord Hoster Tully, diminished and sharp as old apple, gave Rob his blessing in a voice so thin it cut. Caitlin kissed her father's forehead and closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked like the girl who had run in these halls with her hair unbound and sunlight for a shawl. At Harrenhal, Tywin Lannister sat in a hall that stank like drowned trees and old fire and listened to news he did not like. He was not a man who wasted words on complaint. He moved pieces. He ordered Riverland villages burned in a ring to deprive the wolves of meat, and he sent riders to the fords to harry Bolton's men and test them. He said, "Bring me Tyrion." And when Tyrion arrived with bronze insolent eyes darting and his own head tender from a rock thrown by some fool in the mountains, Tywin did not upbraid him for the calamity at the Eyrie. He said, "Go to King's Landing, speak to the Hand. Tell him I will not have my family held. Tell him what it will cost to keep them. Shall I ask for my brother in exchange for his daughters?" Tyrion asked dryly. "We could make it a family sport. Throw in some cousins. The Septons might object." "Ask for nothing," Tywin said with a look that could flay. "Say we are willing to talk. You are to bring me what you can bring me from talk. I will bring the rest by other means." Tyrion smiled because it steadied him and rode south. The Riverlands lay around him like a great dark shirt new blood had been spilled upon. He had never loved the smell of crushed grass the way knights lied of loving it. He loved a quick wit and a good wine and a night when death forgot men existed. This was not such a night. He came to the city and saw the new order at once in the way the watch stood at gates, and in the way stalls lay farther back from the street, and in the way the Red Keep had acquired an edge that had been all gossip before. He climbed the steps to the Tower of the Hand and found a northerner on the landing with a face like a cliff and hands the size of the kindness he had never expected from the capital. He bowed when he saw Ned Stark and felt the curiosity of a man who had read about ice and now saw it wielded as a tool. Ned looked like men who had made themselves at home with cold and with silence. Tyrion thought of his brother, bound and burning with impatience, and tempered his voice as if he approached a horse that would not stand for a saddle gladly. "My father sends his compliments," he said, "and his concern that you are keeping Lady Cersei and the royal children under a hospitality so severe it threatens to become a siege." Ned poured wine and did not drink any himself. Tyrion took the cup because he liked not to insult a man who could have him hanged for an insult. "I keep them for the realm," Ned said, "and for the sake of the children, who will not be harmed while I breathe." "You presume there," Tyrion caught the word in his throat. There were times to speak a blunt blade and times to edge it in silk. "You presume much. Your father presumed when he sent armed men into the Riverlands," Ned said. "He presumed when his son drew steel on a city street and cut down men whose only crime was to obey their lord. He presumed when his daughter taught her son to call himself king before the law had been read." He did not look angry. He looked as if he had taken a sack of stones and decided whether he could carry it. "He has not been called to account for those presumptions yet. He will be." "You mean to try the queen," Tyrion said, tasting the strange salt sweet of it. "And the boy." "I mean to put proof before the realm," Ned said. He laid one hand upon the book that lay open between them. "If the realm chooses a lie, it will not be because it was not shown the truth." He fixed Tyrion with a gaze that had sent men twice Tyrion's size stumbling. "Say to Lord Tywin that he may send an envoy with terms. Say to him that I will not negotiate from fear. Say to him that his son's life will be kept because I am not the thing he would have me be, because I do not kill hostages. Say to him that when the rightful king stands in this hall, he will offer mercy to those who bend the knee." "Stannis has no mercy," Tyrion said without thinking, because the first time he had tried to smile his way past Stannis Baratheon, the man had looked at him as if Stannis, too, held a whetstone and could not conceive why one would ever dull an edge for the sake of laughter. "Stannis has law," Ned said. "We will have to teach him that mercy is a kind of law." Tyrion drank because the wine was good and because it gave him a moment to consider. "And Renly?" he asked. "You will have 2 kings and a city full of people who care for neither. They care for the smell of their breakfast and the safety of their daughters, and whether the watch will keep them from having their heads stove in for the coin a butcher keeps in a pouch." "Renly rides for the reach," Ned said. "He will have a crown before he has a right to it. I have sent to him. I have told him to bring his men to the city, lay down their swords at the gate, and place his claim before a council. I have told him that if he attempts to take the city by force, I will break him on the walls." Tyrion looked at the man who had come to a city that consumed men and who had not yet allowed it to taste him. He thought of Cersei, burning in her gilded cage, and of the way she would laugh when he told her how the Stark spoke in a room that did not sharpen words but smothered them. "You will make enemies, my lord," he said mildly. "I have them," Ned said. Davos returned to Dragonstone with the notched rhythm of oars still in his arms. He gave Stannis Stark's pledge. Stannis listened as if each word were a nail he had ordered hammered in its place long ago. He called his captains. He wrote letters to 100 lords with a hand that would not shake and a temper that would not soften. He had not Robert's love. He had this. He believed himself right, and he was. Sometimes that suffices. Sometimes it damns a man. Davos set the candles before the Red Woman when the shadows drew long. He did not like the woman's eyes. He did not like her breath when she spoke of kings that would not rule and other kings born of light. He liked the thought of a city held by a man he had never met better than the thought of a city ruled by a boy he felt he had known his whole life. The Tyrells crowned Renly in a garden where the air was thick with night-blooming things and the laughter of men who loved beauty and their own reflections. Loras knelt and placed a circlet on his lover's hair, and Renly smiled as if the kingdom were a feast and he at its head, blade and wine and song and forever. He moved at once with the reach behind him, banners a summer storm rolling up the rosy darkness. None of them moved quickly enough. The first clash came at the Green Fork, where Roose Bolton met Tywin Lannister with calculation on both sides and the river watching, ancient and aloof. Bolton gave and then withdrew as if he had intended it from the first, leaving a bite mark in the lion's flank to fester. The second came when scouts carried word to Ned that Renly was 2 days' march from the city and Stannis had sent a fast ship to say he would anchor in the Blackwater within the week. Ned had 3 choices: open the gates to Renly and take his oath to a council that would crown Stannis, lock the gates and face siege from south and west both while Stannis sailed to a city that might be ringed, march out and force the matter before Renly could set his engines. He chose the third. "I was not made to sit a hall," he told Ser Barristan when the old knight came and found him strapping on a sword he had not worn since his leg was cut. "I was made to stand a field." "Your leg," Barristan began. "I have a horse," Ned said. "The boy from the north who would be king rides to us. The man from the sea who has a better claim than any rides to us. I will ride out with men who believe me stubborn. I will return with men who believe me right." Janos Slynt stood at the gate in a new cloak trimmed with fur that had never known snow and watched the host spill down the King's Road like the spine of the city made flesh. He had placed men at the walls. He had placed men in the alleys. He had taken coin to keep them where they belonged. He had taken more coin to keep himself where he belonged, which was close enough to the hand to be seen taking orders and far enough to duck when steel flew. Slynt had no illusions about honor, but he had strong opinions about staying alive. If the Stark brought the city through this, Slynt would live. If he did not, Slynt would find another lion. On the King's Road, dust hung and the sound of iron was a second sun. Renly came wearing a crown that made his brow look like a boy playing at a man. The reach poured around him, green and gold, and their knights' capes billowed as if the wind had sworn fealty to Highgarden. He reined up at sight of the Stark banners and raised a gloved hand. Loras checked with him and sat his horse very straight, as if straightness could pierce anything. Ned rode out alone to the space between the armies. He had no love of show. He understood, however, that sometimes men needed to see. When he stopped, Renly came on, and for a moment there were only the 2 of them and the breath of horses and the smell of grass crushed under so many hooves. "My lord Hand," Renly called, "open your gates." Ned's voice carried in the pause. "Lay down your swords. Take oaths. Present your claim before a council called of the great lords and the faith. If the realm chooses you, I will bend the knee to you, though I have pledged my support to Stannis. If it does not, you will bend to the rightful king." Renly smiled the way men did when they were about to make another kind of choice. "Stannis will never win the love of the realm," he said. "Then let the realm choose whether it loves love or law," Ned said. "I will not open the gates to a siege. I will not let this city be starved by men who say they love it." Loras leaned and said something low and quick. Renly's face changed. "You will bar me from my sister," he called. "You will bar me from the queen." "I will bar you from bloodshed," Ned said. He raised his hand. Behind him, horns sounded, and the city's gates swung wide, not to let Renly in, to let the Stark host ride out. They clashed not 2 miles from the wall, in fields still green. The first charge of the Reach crashed upon a hedge of pikes, and the ground was painted with horses' breath. The northern cavalry met them in the flank, hard, with the Great John whooping like a boy at his first snow. The Hound rode out from the city to keep the king's lands from being trampled by men who did not yet have leave to trample them. He cut down a knight in green and a standard-bearer who could not keep his eyes from the tower of his own banner, and then he wheeled because his own dog nature told him where safer ground lay. Renly's men did not break at once because they were well-fed and well-led and believed themselves loved by the ground they rode. But love of a field had never saved any man from a spear. The day turned. Ned sat his horse and placed his pieces and did not seek glory. He sought to make the other man stop moving. Only in the last light did the Reach begin to fall back, and then they did it tidy and neat because the Tyrells trained their people in neatness the way the North trained its people in survival. In the night that followed, Davos Seaworth's ship slid past the boom chain the Alchemists' Guild had not finished and into the Blackwater's broad mouth, and behind him came a forest of masts. Stannis' flag flew black in the lack of moon and red where torches licked it. He came ashore at dawn and walked up to a city that might have turned him away and did not. He came to the gates of the Red Keep and found them open, and a man with a wolf's face and a sword across his lap sitting, as if he had been waiting for this hour for years. They stood before a hall that had seen 1,000 crowns. Stannis did not waste time speaking of grief. He spoke of proof. Ned placed the book in his hands and told him what he had seen in Lilac Lane and in every bastardy that wore the look of the seed that made it. He told him what he had found in John Arryn's neat notes and the thing the dead man had wanted to show Robert and had died for. Stannis' mouth grew a line like the edge of a blade honed on a whetstone paid for with blood. "Very well," he said. "We will show them." In the throne room, the High Septon stood with eyebrows like wings and a crown of crystal that threw the sun into a dozen little lies on the floor. The lords who had not run sat in their places. The ones who had found in their courage a reason to be late came late. Varys glided like a fish in a clear bowl. Roose Bolton stood where he had always stood, in a shadow with a smile that could mean many things. Davos leaned against a pillar with his hands tucked in his sleeves. He had a reverence for halls that had little to do with the faith and everything to do with stone holding up roof. Ned spoke with the measured patience of a man laying a case for men who needed to hear it twice. Stannis spoke like a hammer. Barristan Selmy spoke with a quiet that carried better than any shout. Grand Maester Pycelle swelled like a wineskin left too long in the sun and stuttered. The small folk listened because the doors had been opened and because watch halberds were placed where fists would otherwise have been. Some cried out for the queen. Some cried out for Joffrey. Some cried out for the wolf. Most cried out for bread. In the end, the High Septon placed his hand upon Stannis' shoulder and said words that could be read 2 ways if you squinted and 1 way if you did not, and then he anointed the man whom the law recognized. The sound that rose then was strange. It was not joy. It was not anger. It was the sound of a city considering which way it would go to live another day. Stannis took the style and the weight that came with it and named Ned Stark his hand. Men who knew them both thought it a union as unnatural as snow on a hot griddle. It was, in fact, exactly what the realm required. A man who would never lie to win, and a man who would never bend to please. They sat together in council and could not agree on whether mercy had a place in a ledger that included treason. They agreed that the ledger must be meted and that the coin measured must not be blood if it could be avoided. Cersei Lannister came before them in a chamber that smelled faintly of salt and parchment and fear. She carried herself as if fear were a cloak she disdained to wear. She did not deny. She did not ask. She laughed once. It sounded like a sword slipping in a sheath. Stannis' face hardened. Ned's eyes were colder than any river ice. They made a compromise the way a butcher made neat cuts. The queen was to be kept alive in a tower within view of the Sept and the sea, given the courtesy owed her birth and denied the power she had abused. Joffrey was to be placed with the faith at the Great September, watched, taught, kept from command and from sport with knives alike. Tommen and Myrcella were to be placed in households far from each other and farther still from their uncles, where they would learn a gentler arithmetic than the one their mother had taught them. Jaime remained in a northern camp with a guard who understood that honor, like a razor, could be kept keen without being kept naked at all hours. Tywin Lannister sent a letter written in a hand so correct it was an insult. He said he would never bend to a false king. He said he would never surrender his daughter or deny his grandson. He signed his name with a flourish that had made judges sign where he wanted them to for 3 decades. Stannis sent a reply written in a hand that had learned its letters upon a board with knots in it and had never forgotten how to carve wood with a knife. He told Tywin to come and argue his case with sword or with tongue as he preferred. He told him that mercy waited if he came before the city. He told him that justice would find him if he did not. War had a way of coming even when 2 men do not send for it by name. Tywin moved east like a storm across the Green Fork. He had learned from the Fords and from Roose Bolton that what looked like slow was sometimes careful. He set his foragers like a rat king, tying them together with short ropes of command so that they could not scurry too far from his core. The riverlands bled. Old women wrapped their bread in cloths and took it into holes in the ground under their hearthstones and came back to find holes and fire and the smell of salt beef and men. Children learned to run before they learned to talk again. Robb Stark pulled his horse up on a low rise and looked across a field where stubble yellowed and the wind moved in long hands. Jaime Lannister sat a horse beside him for the first time since Whispering Wood, with his hands tied in front for dignity and behind for safety. "That field," Jaime said conversationally, "will want blood. Some do. All of them do," Robb said. He looked at the lines of men in gray and blue and green. "The question is how much." "More than you intend," Jaime said pleasantly. The battle that followed was not like songs. It was like a craft done at speed. Workmen sweating at a task whose plan had been traced upon the air in chalk that smudged when hands brushed it. Bolton came in at the right moment with the right men and did a thing it took an eye like his to see how to do. He took a chunk out of Tywin's flank and left without gorging himself on his own boldness. The Great John made a wall of meat where Tywin had thought there would be bone. The Karstarks bled and did not cry out because their lord did not. When the day ended, neither army had the field in hand. Then the second day came, and the third, because this was not a tourney but a question that could only be answered by how many dead the earth would tolerate before it refused to open further. On the 4th day, the news came quick as any blade. Renly Baratheon was dead at Storm's End, taken by a shadow men could not describe without their tongues drying. They blamed Stannis because they had no other place to set blame down where it would stay. They blamed a woman in red. They blamed the gods. They blamed their own eyes. The Tyrells turned their host with a speed that made even Tywin Lannister blink. They did not go home. They came north again, but not toward King's Landing. They came toward Harrenhal with a letter in hand from a new king and a seal that would split the realm with honey where iron had failed. Ned and Stannis stood upon the walls of the city and watched dust on horizons that meant too many things. "We are all the realm has between it and a great tearing," Ned said. "We are the law," Stannis said. "If they break upon us, they break upon the law. The law needs bread," Ned said, "and patience." "You are the bread," Stannis said unexpectedly. "I am the patience." "I would have thought the other way," Ned said, surprised into the ghost of a smile. That night a raven came to the Red Keep from Riverrun. It said that Lord Tywin had been struck by an arrow as he rode from the field late, his helmet off because he had thought himself far from danger. It said that the arrow had been loosed by some nobody with a bow who would never be named. It said that the man had died a moment later with a spear in his belly, as most men who did things of consequence did. Said that Tywin had not died at once. He had been carried into the black hall of Harrenhal and laid upon a table that still smelled of burning. He had gripped his son's hand and said nothing and died with his mouth, set the way a man sets his mouth when he has decided to endure and finds that endurance must now be practiced upon himself. Silence fell upon the city at the news. Not grief, not joy. Silence. Cersei sat in her tower and smiled with her teeth, and then she bit her own lip until she bled, and then she went to the window and stared at the sea as if she might find some path across it. Joffrey tore his covers at the September and called for a sword, and then when none came he wept like a boy who had lost a dog that loved him, though he had loved only the way the dog obeyed. Tyrion found himself a chair and sat down hard and drank wine and listened to his own breath. He had always known he would outlive his father. He had never believed he would outlive him by axe he could not tie a bow on. He sent a letter thin as parchment to his sister. He sent a letter to his brother bound thin as thread to 2 guards who rode with faces blank as clay. He sat then with his head in his hands. Bronn said nothing because he knew when silence was the thing a friend could afford. The Tyrells, lacking a king to love and finding none willing to marry in the hour they demanded, withdrew to make gardens of scorched fields. The Riverlands took a breath that did not taste of smoke for the first time in months. Roose Bolton came to King's Landing with a measured step and a careful smile to lay at Stannis' feet. Men he had hardly lost, and a fealty that sounded sincere. Ned watched his eyes and thought of shadows that lay flat even at noon. A great council convened at last because the realm needed to dress its wound. Lords came grudgingly and willingly, and because not coming would be noted. They sat under the Seven and under the rafters and under the close eyes of common men, who could not sit but who could stand and listen and tell their neighbors later what had been decided about their lives. Proof was laid out like a body. Names were said. Allegiances shifted, as they always did when the weight of a chair and the weight of a sword had to be balanced. In the end, Stannis Baratheon was acclaimed as the rightful king by those who loved law, and those who loved bread grudged and swallowed and began to love it too, because steady hands had brought flour to the ovens and meat to the pot. Robb Stark entered the city with dust in his hair and Jaime Lannister riding beside him and their wolves pacing like living shadows. Sansa saw him from a window and her heart filled with something she had not had room for. A feeling that the world could be set right again, not by music but by stubbornness and by men who refused to be anything but what they were. Arya watched from the training yard and did not grin because Syrio had warned her that joy is a balance breaker and a girl who wants to keep her feet should keep them both on the ground. The hand sat in the solar with maps and bread and an old friend's ghost at his shoulder, and for a little while there was a kind of peace. It was the peace men had when they finish one job and see 3 more that must be done before winter and think, I will begin the next. The next was the Ironborn, who smelled wind in the way a dog smells a hair in the grass. The next was the wall and the whispers that came down of dark things walking. The next was the quiet in Roose Bolton's voice when he offered men for garrisons at Harrenhal and at the fords and at the Twins and anywhere else the king desired a flayed man keeping the peace. Stannis burned his letters neatly and kept his ledgers neat and argued with Ned about whether a sentence could be turned to mercy or must be carried out to keep the law from going thin. Davos went to the docks and made friends with men who cursed in 6 tongues and meant it in 1. Varys kept watching and smoothed papers with his fingers the way other men stroked cats. Sometimes the cat purred, sometimes it scratched, but it never left his lap. Janos Slynt found the watch took orders from a hand who cared if they walked the alleys and kept the peace and if they robbed less than they used to. He put more coin under his tile in case they did. Peter Baelish learned how well a man could smile in a place where no one was there to see him. Cersei kept the window open and then closed and then open again. At Winterfell, Bran Stark sat straight in his chair with a direwolf's head carved upon it and judged a quarrel between men whose fathers had quarreled and whose sons might not if he did not show too much pity or too much pride. Rickon came to sit at his feet and then slept there, and the nurses let him because much had been expected of small shoulders in slow days and there was no harm in rest. Maester Luwin wrote careful letters. Osha sat quiet and watched the sky and did not stop dreaming of snow. On a night when the moon rode thin as a blade in a sky clean of cloud, Ned Stark walked through the God's Wood of the Red Keep and did not find a face carved in any trunk. He stood by the pool and thought of the weirwood at Winterfell and of a boy he had been who had believed that some groves kept answers in their bark. He had been wrong then. The answers were always in the choices made at a table with bread and at a gate with steel. He had made his choices. He had called north to march south for the sake of a friend and a law older than any of them. The march had changed the city and changed the day Robert died and changed the course of a river of blood that might otherwise have filled every alley. He stayed there until the wind off the river lifted the hair at his temples. He listened. The pool did not speak. The city breathed. Somewhere, a wolf lifted its head and scented, and lowered it again to sleep. He turned at last and made his careful way to the tower, where a boy who would never be a boy again had fallen asleep over a map and a dog lay with its nose upon his boot. Ned did not wake him. He lay down on his own hard bed and closed his eyes and did not hope for sleep. He hoped for another day of choices. Dawn came with cries from the gulls and the scullions. He rose and went to work. In the north, men he had called were fitting wheels to carts because the snow would come one day, though the day was not yet on them. At the wall, a boy with his face and not his name walked out into white and breathed air so cold it hurt and felt glad to hurt, because it meant he still knew what heat was. In the riverlands, peasants stood in fields where bones lay underfoot and stared down and told themselves that seed grew better where blood had fallen, because men tell themselves what they need to for the sake of their children. The tale had not ended. Tales like this never did. They rolled forward on the sound of hooves and the ring of hammers and the hush of prayers and the breath of wolves, carrying with them the small, human stubbornness that forged kingdoms and mended them when kings forgot. Ned Stark had ordered the North to march upon the city of summer. The North had marched. The city had not fallen to silence or rot. It had been set to a new rhythm, slow and sure, the way a smith orders a bellows to give him heat thick enough to shape iron. The shape would hold for a time. Then winter would come and men would have to remember how to bank coals and share walls and sharpen blades for different enemies. So it had always been, in truth, even when men pretended that summer was a promise instead of a reprieve. On a quiet morning when the gulls rested and the tide had not yet turned, the hand looked from his window and saw a boy below, loping, skinny, hair like midnight, a wooden sword in his hand and a barefooted, laughing fury in his stride. The sight made him think of Bran clambering along the walls and of Lyanna, wild as grass and wind, and of the way a man could build halls and laws and still be ruled in the softest part of himself by a memory of a girl with leaves caught in her hair. He watched until the boy vanished. Then he turned to the table and took up his quill. The work waited. It always did. He smiled without anyone to see it, and the smile did not soften his face so much as set it. He began to write.